Jerry, and he's like a giant. And then introduced Dr. Veera, a lady doctor. She's investigating this research. And I looked at them and I gave some books. And they took the lab and showed what they're doing, the meditation, pranayama, and other physiological things. I saw in one lab through a small window because the experiment is going on. That's pumping heart, etc. So, and then show their lab contains the various computers and so forth. I was impressed by the enthusiasm they are doing to find out the truth. I don't know what they found out at that time, I do not know. But anyhow, the setup in a small scale, but it is regularly going on for years. So at the end, I told my meeting was only 15 minutes or so. I told the director, is it possible can you send Dr. Veera and his engineer for the to set up a small lab in our headquarters in Canada? Because I don't know how much it's going to cost, etc. But anyhow, he said he's interested. He'll send some these two people. So they were not sure also what my many people talk so many things. So they did not believe whether they are really going to invite them in. But naturally, once I say something, I don't just back off. It doesn't matter what happens afterwards. So I again contacted them. So they sent Dr. Veera and Dr. Jennings, chief engineers. And they need equipment, and we don't have any equipment. And then we also invite Dr. Shankarnarayan to come from India. And we need several equipment, the EJ, we don't have any facilities here. So I contacted Germany, etc., and we got all things necessary to the coverage and investigate, etc. The first time I want to see how there's no EEG which you can carry and measure, because this alpha and whatever state, these people with 108 spheres and one to the tongue straight, one to the cheek, and 108 spheres almost all over. What state of consciousness they are having? Because I had this type of festival in Berlin, but we never had an opportunity to investigate. People believe whatever they saw, but I want to just show something more than our present physiology and our anatomy, that thinks everything is physical body. They have to understand anything beyond the physical body. Even if they talk about EEG, there's only three waves they know. Those are the three: theta, a little bit above, and then alpha, and then beta. I know all this little bit, long term I learned that. But they understand everything is only this brain movement or brain wave. Behind that something more. You can do things what our present medical science have not learned. Therefore, it's not possible to stop the heartbeat, pulse rate, or change it. The heat, right hand at certain heat, left hand, they can change the heat. These are new phenomena for the Western scientists, and they're doing research work. Especially East European countries like Russia, Czechoslovakia, Poland. Long time ago, several years ago, I was watching, and I went also to East European countries. I was in Russia several years ago, and that time they invited me 200 top scientists. Long story. So I decided to invite these people, and then we got the equipment we needed several. Those equipment to carry the EEG, monitoring the heartbeat, etc. They got a portable one. It's very sensitive equipment, not very expensive, about $56,000. We didn't have the money. Somehow, whenever I need anything, call Bulgaria in Germany, please find out whatever price is not important, get the equipment and that. So you know how things came. Then Jerry also on next year he want to investigate the spectrometer, using a spectrometer, various things that first to make it in. So that also $150,000 again got in house. Wrong story. Then this year we found out a new image. I sent Swami Srinivasan to Czechoslovakia because they want both Srinivasan and Samuelji, and then we couldn't send because we need both of them because it's all got with limited staff. So they had to teach a training course and this and that, and I would transfer them. So I only sent Srinivasan alone to Czechoslovakia, and then they went and met and all the directors and of course they know whether he knows by that Dr. Veera and Jerry, because they were like a family members here. So they were very happy to see him, and he went and saw all those things and met the directors and all that. And then he reported about the Kavadi ceremony, what investigation they found out. So by that time we already have some basic ideas that they already presented the paper. Why in the first state consciousness existed throughout. That's what Kavadi ceremony. Even though eyes are wide open, suddenly experience to all over body plus to skin and skin, there's no blood, etc. Shankaran just scientifically explained, but even though I don't think that what he said was right, but anyhow, accept it. And then I just because when they imagine that everything is, they want to put the whole thing, the universe, into their cup. Is what scientists are trying to do. When they don't understand, they try to bring the science to them. Like the story of a frog psychologist, several times I told, but I want more I told before. A scientist want to find out why frogs hop. Because he's got 4 legs, he doesn't walk like other animals, 4 legs. Hop. So he brought a frog to the lab and trained, jumped. And he wouldn't jump, so he gave a shock. Frog got the shock, he jumped. And he jumped, he get a fly. So he learned from trial and error. If you didn't jump, you get a shock, pain. And if you jump, you get a fly. So without giving a shock, jump, you jump. Trial and error, the frog learned. So he brought a big long table, he put it measured. It's a 10 feet long table and put a special measurements, distance in centimeters, inches and feet. And put the center and put the frog there. He just jumped. Frog jumped and measured. It was 5 feet deep long with 4 legs. So he took a 1 leg off, and other frog jumped with 3 legs. He jumped, but not 5 feet, well, maybe about 3.5 feet. He took 1 more leg off and jumped over maybe not too much, but maybe 2 feet. And if 1 leg, he again jumped maybe 10 centimeters. And then he took the last leg also, the 4th leg also off, jumped. This time frog did not jump, simply stayed the frog. And he wrote, frog did not jump this time because the frog cannot hear without the legs. That's the conclusion. Because it took off all the legs, he can't hear, and the hearing was diminishing because each head because of hearing is not. This is he came to the conclusion, and he became frog psychologist, frog psychologist, and Dr. Freud, and he started teaching to university students about frog psychology. Yes, our scientists, they try to put what they think from their point if they understood. They don't understand what the frog thinks, that's not important, So that's child psychology. Why child is suckling in the birth? It's because of hunger. No. Freud said, no, it's not because of hunger, it's because sex instinct. Well, he put everything. And why you got problem? Because your father and mother started spanking you when you were a child, you got inferiority complex, that's the complex coming up, that's all the psychological problem because the father and mother created. Sure. The father and mother is not there, they won't be here, so he fixed all the problems. So all that scientists are trying to do is try to put the whole world into their cup. Well, that's wrong story. Anyhow. Again, yesterday I heard from Shankaran about various states of consciousness. The data state, and the theta state, and the dream state, REM, rapid eye movement, and then sleepwalking. Various state of consciousness is explained. Again, they're trying to put the whole thing into their cup. We do not know what it really means. God only knows. But anyhow, there was some place, there is some kind of stage in Saturn, and between Saturn and Alpha ring must be that caused the painless condition in the brain, and the brain doesn't feel, and because of the capillaries was brought into such a state, there's no bleeding, and so they put all they try to anyhow. Doesn't matter, but anyhow, you all believe what they say. Yeah, but so doctor, and I'm not saying that you're wrong. Well, I'm still interested in that. Though they make mistakes, they got their own way of, but still they try to find out the truth. Whatever is the limited intellect, they're trying to find the truth. I'm very grateful to them. So this year, they did not send Dr. Veera and Dr. Chief Engineer, because they need them there. So they sent Dr. Andre and Engineer Michael. He looks like a boy when he sent my car. Why they send a boy to me? Now, how old he is? He is 32 years old. And how do you get, what is your doctorate degree? What did you get? Then he said, it's psychophysiology. I never heard that before. He got a doctorate in psychophysiology. So I asked what is psychophysiology, and he said about the phenomenon, and then he's a brilliant scientist, definitely, because after hearing few words, and then a new engineering man, Andre, Michael, Kuno. And of course he can't speak too much English, but a little bit he understands. Then Srinivasan reported something. He never sleeps. Since he came to the lab, both of them spend all the time, don't sleep, they don't eat, they just stay there and watch, and that's the nature of true nature of a true scientist. They don't want to eat, they don't want to sleep, they don't want even money, they don't care about money, they don't want anything. They want to find out the truth. That's the true nature of any scientist. And then I found out, Srinivasan reported me, that, and also of course, order, he's a real brilliant engineer. He invents things from nowhere. So anyhow, he invented certain things and showed me what they've done, etc. I'm very, very happy. So yesterday, Dr. Shankarnarayan told something about various state of consciousness. Today, we'll hear from Dr. Andre about the research they have done last 40 years, 30 years, or whatever it is, in Czechoslovakia, and the last 3-4 years here, because we've got more experiments here they can do, because we've got the equipment. Also, we had the subjects, like you all, so many teacher trainings and special yogis, like Swami Vishnu, brilliant in pranayama, Swami Vishnu, brilliant in meditation and Vedanta, etc. So they've got every type of subject they can find here, which nowhere in the world they can find in one place. Plus the equipment and also freedom they have. Here no one is going to look there over the shoulder every time. No one is boss you. Is it not the way no one can boss you? No. People that type of freedom they have, the full freedom to do what they want. I only went once or twice when you check inside 5 minutes only. That's all. That was sufficient for me to see everything is neat and clean, what they are doing. And one day I'll just go incognito and just go find out what they are doing. But I would not bother you, because still Shankarnarayan is having his new coil for the head, etc. I just find out what it is, and then they came out. That's sufficient. And the occasion they send the report, but I got no time even to think that. But anyhow, they are here today, and they got reports to show you. Yoga masters knew many things which our scientists are just discovering thousands of years ago. They never had any lab. They never even knew there was an EEG machine. They never knew there's a right brain or left brain. It's only been discovered recently. They said thousands of years ago, no, there are two hemispheres. They call it Ida and Pingala. They just would use Sanskrit name. That's not important. That means the energy moves from the left side to the right side and right left. They knew thousands of years ago. And that way it created pranayama, inhale, retain, exhale, inhale, retain, exhale. Nowhere in the world anyone is doing alternate breathing. Why you have to breathe? You have to breathe, both are working. They said, school, you go there, they will say, okay, breathe deep. Breathe down. They don't know, even the doctors don't know how to breathe. They just raise the shoulder and then that one goes up. Wrong, all between wrong. Though they have no physiology, anatomy, they know purpose to learn. But still, whether you inhale with one nostril or both nostrils, air goes to right nostril, air goes right lung, is it not? Sure? Left nostril, inhale, inhale. Then it goes left lung, is it not? Is it? That's why they are doing alternate. No one knew. But yogis know thousands of years. The energy flows, certain times the right hemisphere is operating, left side is almost semi-paralyzed or semi-acromatic. So the left nostril, by checking the nostrils, you can find out the condition of your brain. Without giving EEG, they knew this thousands of years ago. So if the left hemisphere operated, then the right brain, the left nostril is operating, and the right brain is operating. That means your philosophical, musical, emotional brain is active. Then if the right nostril is active, then your left brain, the mathematical, the analytical, your scientific brain is operating. Most of the people in the West, they use mostly left side of the brain. Western, they use the right brain, except under some of the musicians. Even Albert Einstein, he used to lots of mathematical his left brain constantly used to relax and to keep the left brain relaxed, and so right brain go for a sailing in the ocean. That's how he relaxed his left brain, analytical, mathematical, scientific brain, and made the right brain just to be active. He has to go there because he cannot take up the constantly bombarding the left brain with a formula. As you saw that Shankaran was giving various types of mathematical calculations, and my brain started going, boy, come on, that's what it is. And then we call her, the Jelena came and just prayed, thank you. And yesterday, Satydev played the flute after all the clarifications and talked about all the various consciousness and relax. And then we just did a balance both the brain. That by inhalation, exhalation, the breathing called Kevala Kumbhaka. This balances the brain. Make the right brain active, overactive, and take advantage of the left brain and vice versa. Yogis knew this through thousands of years. But there was no explanation possible. Why left brain? Why not alternate breathing? I said the Ida and Pingala, but that's not this word. They won't believe. But now with the supercomputer, super EEG, that is analyzed. That subject, all the investigation we have done with the last year, with the breathing, with our asanas, and there for so many years of, he is going to give a full description. So, give a warm welcome to Dr. Andre. Engineer myself.
Dear Swamiji, dear friends, tonight I will speak about two things. I don't want to cover all the topics that I brought with me in slides because
it's hard today.
And tomorrow, yeah. So I prepared something for tomorrow.
Both of you over to be
But things that I would like to present today are mostly, or all practically, coming from the Ashram's laboratory, in which our work has also participated, mostly Dr. Lepichovska and Engineer Merkuichka, and by great help of Srinivasan, our good friend and co-worker who is always staying with us. They made very interesting work, and about this I will speak tonight. So first part of the lecture will be about Kavadi, an outstanding phenomenon that was first time investigated scientifically, and it's interesting.
Kavadi is one of the. I don't come from because they have a Subramania temple, Lord Subramania. It lives in the top of the mountain for farming. You have farming. We have also a Kavadi in our house. We have Sundays to recharge every year to the farming. It's called Adima Kavadi. We call it. That's the. We are surrendered to Lord Subramania as a family deity. So we must send this Kavadi every year, and the senior member will take it. If not nobody there, somehow we have sent that and recharge and do puja and find and bring it back. They magnetize energy. And people go to find me, devotees they carry various types of Kavadi. It's a curved thing, it's small, and then either end there with flowers and various type of milk and fruits etc. They hand and then take it to. It's kind of religious function they perform. But also in some extreme cases, some people, they called Arabic Kavadi, which is very beautiful Kavadi. Means here they don't put their certain fruits, etc. This Kavadi is spears. The one end of the spear goes in, other end goes up, other way. The 100 spears they put it, and they get an ecstasy, and so they also very seldom they get an injury or any side effect of that, though all spears are not sterilized, no infection, etc. We do not know anyhow. So that's the Kavadi. Now you see all the pictures, etc., how the Kavadi looks like.
And the second part of the lecture was about other things, about pranayama, about anuloma viloma. And
now again, don't have you Sanskrit. In Czechoslovakia, I noticed one beautiful thing about all the East European. They use real Sanskrit names. They never use any translation. You see, that's the most amazing thing. I was in Czechoslovakia, Prague. They always use Sanskrit words. They never Anuloma Viloma means alternate breathing. We translated, but that is a wrong translation. But still, they use the original Sanskrit name. That's why Anuloma Viloma means alternate breathing. For you to understand. You understand may not understand. If you can translate occasionally, you can do that.
And
Anuloma Viloma, wait.
Yes, and I have no question about the role of bandhas.
Bandhas, again, log, just say log. They may not understand all this. They know all the techniques, but Sanskrit words, the Westerners never use the Sanskrit words.
They are mostly associating bread holes, kumpakas.
He is like Sanskrit, but he is everything Sanskrit. Not only he, all over. Even Dr. Veeraj, everybody, they use only Sanskrit, but never translate even their language they won't translate. Kumbhaka means retention. Okay, go ahead.
So, we would start with Kavadi and we would present a small shot from video that was recording during the Kavadi, because there are certainly persons that did not show it 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. So this was the first contact before starting the slides and the investigations that were done. So may I have the video?
Okay, lights off, please. No, you are the Acharya. You are a teacher for me. Because whenever any time I consider Acharya my teacher, because I learn from the many things. From the third time I can't learn anything. So thank you all scientists who are here. You are my Acharya, my teacher. So why are these big lights?
Grooming site for the uninitiated. Here at the Sivananda Ashram Yoga Camp, a man in a deep trance is being pierced by 108 spears, a ritual for removing negative forces.
The Kavadi, it represents the energy pattern of everything has an energy pattern, like a pyramid is an energy pattern. Crystals have energy pattern. In fact, everything has got energy pattern. The particular shape of Kavadi has got an energy pattern, and when the devotee in India, they carry this, you can see the one and the one small one, not so elaborate, but just, and that creates change the energy pattern of the body. Spears also is a radiation of energy, like a spoke of a wheel. So this from the body, the magnetic prana is radiating to all. See, and when especially that avesha comes, the energy of the Supreme Being is radiated through that, like an antenna. Those spears act like antenna, you see, it radiates in all directions.
The spears go into the skin about 1/4 inch deep. They also puncture the cheek and the tongue. The facial punctures bleed somewhat after the spears are removed. It requires complete concentration and considerable preparation.
Several days they fast and observe celibacy and pray, etc. You see, and then they have to worship Subramania morning and evening. They do worship, and this way the mind is prepared. You see, and then suddenly that they get into kind of energy into their body.
Two researchers studied for the first time body functions during the ritual, brainwaves, breathing, and pulse rate using a portable monitor. Data would be analyzed later.
And it allows us to take about 2 or 3 hours record.
It is a high-tech study of what happens to the human body during an ancient practice.
The old spirit and the new technology meets together. Might be it will be for the profit of both.
Howard Schwartz, Pulse News, Val Morin.
Thank you. So this was such a brief introduction just to remind what was happening 2 years ago in summer. And now I would like to have slides. And yes, that was an important thing that was not presented in the video because it is a short, it's just a TV shot. And but still there was an important thing that was not on the shot, and this was the convulsions that occurred after 10th or 15th minute of the Kavadi itself. The man fell in a second on the floor, and he displayed tonic seizures of the grand mal epileptic type. So
this was sometimes will show you that in the beginning how they start. The puja starts and first man is to practice celibacy, though he is an ordinary man. That period 1 week, 10 days before he practice absolute celibacy, vegetarian, that though he may not be vegetarian, but that time 15 days. And then ceremony starts, so forth. And then one moment his body as striking by the 10,000 volts. Energy flows in his body. We do not know, but anyhow we can see as if he touched an electrical wire, high tension wire, and his body suddenly falls down and with like fit action. And then it became a little normal, and then slowly the priest throws some holy ash to reduce that energy, maybe decrease the energy, and then he also cut some lemon and sprinkles, or many other things are rituals they do. But anyhow, it will loosen the energy, and the energy becomes controllable to him to a certain extent. It won't be violent anymore. But then afterwards, first you put the priest pushes the tongue, one end of the tongue to another one skin, and then other one places the button, other one back. All the time our EEG were monitoring the heartbeat, etc. That's the first time anytime in the history ever anyone monitored. So now that's what Dr. Andre is going to say.
So just a few slides more to introduce you in the situation. This is from the preparatory period where the mantras are repeated, there is music as you heard, and we must admit, as Swamiji has explained, that the procedure, the preparatory period is longer. For example, they have the man, a young subject, 29-year-old, he had 3-day fasting and a lot of spiritual activities that was undertaken with him. So next slide, please. And this is the situation of implementing of electrodes. This is the situation of implementing of electrodes. The problem of the recording of such a procedure, of such a ceremony, is very tedious work and very difficult. One cannot explain that we will have brain emitter adjusted or applied to this. So the scientists just had one channel EEG recorded bipolarly from left central parietal area, and this was fed through the telemetric system into ZAC polygraph, and 3-minute epochs of EEG were converted into spectral bands, very well known alpha, theta, delta, and beta waves, beta bands. These readings were stored in the computer, as I said, every 3 seconds. While the man was far, he was moving, dancing, etc. The other signals were also stored, recorded by the ZAC polygraph, and these were respiration converted to respiratory rate and heart rate and beats per minute. So you see Dr. Vela Lepichovska here, and the other colleague is not present in the picture. So may I have on that slide? Yes, this is also adjusting of electrodes. It should be glued by collodion to withstand all the walking and moving and all the movements. You see the ECG electrode placed over here, and here the gauge for respiratory movements. The next slide, please. And you see the detail of the spears, 180 spears. They were put 2 or 3 millimeters under the skin. They were yes, one
in the bottom of the sock or the
there was no bleeding, no pain sensation throughout cavity, neither after the cavity. So may I have the next slide? And it is just to show you how he was moving all around. He was dancing, he was carrying 15 kilograms of cavity.
Plus all the equipment also here, the EEG and the monitoring and so forth.
So now you can, maybe if I remind you of one scientific slide from the other period, you will see that this was a rather demanding situation of physical stress as it is. On the next slide. And the next slide which show you how he was moving with his old
Yeah,
cavity.
went from here all the way to the Val Morin village and walked up all the way back, carrying the same thing with the 108 spears and the chin and the cheek are still pierced, and with all the EEG etc. monitoring continuously to see the reaction of the heart rate and the breathing pattern and the EEG brain wave etc.
So thank you for the slides for a moment. I would just tell you what was the schedule of the experimental record. So the scientists wanted to know how was the functional state of the subject pre-kavadi, pre-ceremony, because they wanted to know whether it was a normal one, whether the subject did not have some covered pathological patterns in EEG, whether he was all right.
Normally, he was normal. He's a normal. He's working as mostly. He's a man working with some kind of welding or something like that. He's an ordinary worker.
So they performed several measurements pre-kavadi, the period which was preceding kavadi, and these measurements included resting record in the supine position with eyes closed and with eyes opened, and later a physical stress, a step test, and further as a test, this was hyperventilation, which is commonly used in neurology for detection of some hidden pathological patterns of EEG. So may I have the next slide, one of the first of this scientific slide. Of course, the next. Well, this is a picture which shows heart rate and respiratory rate in various situations in this period preceding kavadi. So on the left panel there are respiratory rates. These are the lower values, lower bars, and heart rate, which is the upper bar. The heart rate was normal throughout the resting period. It was about 70, 72, so quite normal. And respiratory rate was also normal, 20 to 28 per minute. After this, the step test was started. The values of respiratory rate, thank you. The values for respiratory rate are here. Oh, sorry, the lower bars, and for heart rate, the upper bars. And as it is commonly in normal subjects, the heart rate increased up to 100, 120, and the respiratory rate correspondingly to 50 to 60 per minute. After this, the physiological values returned to the resting level. And next, the hyperventilation was started, and again, the hyperventilation consists of the more rapid and more deeper breathings. So it's no sense to speak about respiratory rate, it was increased, and the heart rate was also increased. This is a normal reflex response on hyperventilation. So what this slide shows that the subject normally responds by his respiratory rate and heart rate on the stress, which is typical stress, used in physiology to detect how the organism is, what is the functional state in the organism. This is the next slide.
Did you find any physiological stress?
Yes, this was step test. This was
Not normal physiology.
Yes, this was normal response.
Abnormal.
No, this was normal response.
That's how the EEG and the heart rate are there.
Yeah, this is EEG. This will be. Yes. So.
Walk it a little bit more.
Can we? This is the most interesting band. Can it be raised? Yes, like this. Okay, that's okay. This record showed the consecutive values gathered at 3-second period. Here we have a time scale in minutes, and on the vertical axis we have power in so-called effective units for alpha band, beta band, theta band, and delta band. And in two situations, in the left panel, when the subject was in the supine position with eyes closed, and in the right panel, when the eyes were opened by instruction. And we see that by eyes closed, the alpha level, or alpha power, was maintained approximately around 10% of effective power. But when the eyes were open, it was suppressed practically to minimum. And after again closing of eyes, the raise of alpha activity to above the resting level. What this picture shows that the subject normally responds to the visual stimulations. This response is known as alpha blocking. It works not only on visual stimulation, also other sensory inputs are provoking this, or attention.
That means that before in the normal state of investigation, before the cognitive is started, this is the investigation done before the cognitive.
Yes. So
that means he's just like normal person, as a normal activity.
Cortical response in terms of alpha block is quite normal in this subject. So
that means he's a normal person, just like anybody else.
Please, the next slide. And here we have a picture showing changes during hyperventilation. We only see what is really changed is all these slow waves that are appearing, but we should admit that the exact polygraph doesn't have control over the artifacts. But there was nothing interesting also in the other bands during the hyperventilation, so they did not conclude any abnormality according to their findings. Please, the next slide. This was the first slide from Kavadi ceremony itself. This Kavadi was performed for 1.5 hours. The recording is not from the whole session, it was just after insertion of electrodes, so approximately 100 minutes. And I'm sorry, this was 2 hours, and this is just 100 minutes out of this. And here we see the respiratory rate during the Kavadi ceremony, as recorded telemetrically by exact polygraph. And we see that the respiratory rate was very high, it was minimally 40 per minute, but it raised up to 70 per minute. It's a very high respiratory rate corresponding to a large autonomic and metabolic demand of the situation, that it was really exerting physical activity. Please, the next slide. And please now note the changes in EEG. All bands exhibited increase of power. However, the most interesting was the increase of power in alpha band. As we remember, in the resting state, this was around 10, approximately 10% of the effective power. However, during Kavadi, it was in the average 30, that means 3 times greater. So this is particularly the most important finding, because if we now consider that the eyes were kept open throughout the session, throughout the Kavadi, throughout the ceremony, it points to complete blackout or elimination of alpha blocking mechanism. This phenomenon, this means failing of alpha blocking, is known in neurology, is seen, for example, in some acute psychotic attacks. It is known by certain damages of the brain, and also during altered state of consciousness. This is where we are pointing now. That means, for example, Colby and co-workers, they found that during a yogic type of meditation there is a missing of alpha blocking on visual stimulation. And also Wallace and co-workers found in a more or less relaxatory type of meditation failing of alpha blocking on visual stimulation. So these findings, together with the documents that were gathered during Kavadi, this point that at least 3 different types of arguments or phenomena shows that this really altered state of consciousness was achieved. First, there was no pain perception and failing of the alpha blocking mechanism, showing to ruling out of the normal sensory input to cortex. And that means that the consciousness was somehow changed. The other was the large metabolic and physical exertion that was during the Kavadi, and which does not correspond to the above resting level of the alpha activity. That means some splitting between metabolic motor activity and the EEG occurred. And third, these were the tonic seizures, which were not unfortunately shown on the short shot from TV, and which really showed that very deep subcortical motor patterns were released during the Kavadi. Taken together, this phenomenon points to an altered state of consciousness, which is partially difficult to explain. I mean, this pertaining great motor activity and still a very resting state of
great motor activity means the
dancing, walking,
all the walking and the talking and I mean, not you cannot talk, but the walking and then sustained by the fears, etc. with the weight. So the motor activity is very high, but alpha activity was
still pertains
very
high.
Very high. That is generally it's not possible, is it not?
So there are findings that showing that there is possible such a split between EEG and motor output. For example, we also have seen in our laboratory that after vigorous Nauli,
now again they want to Nauli means another type of abdominal exercise. Wonderful.
Which comes to very profound stimulation of the abdominal cavity, internal organs. And after this, one subject experienced yogi displayed grand mal epileptic phenomena in EEG, but he was completely calm, relaxed, no motor concomitant. And tomorrow we show another example of one subject who was in a rather deep relaxation, but showing heart rate around 120, heart respiratory rate 3 per minute, 3 per second, and other very large autonomic changes without any changes in EEG, only low amplitude alpha powers throughout the session. So there is possibility of splitting such of various levels of the neurophysiological brain regulation of the organism, but how it is achieved is difficult to predict, and something to say about it, at least for me.
Last year Dr. Veera was examined, and there are only words called the doctor because my blood pressure went up quite high, but the EEG was quite low. That difference more. Okay.
So thank you for this slide, and I will approach the other part of this talk, which will be about Anuloma Viloma.
And alternate breathing now. What happens to alternate breathing?
So Anuloma Viloma is a kind of yogic breathing exercises, pranayama, and they...
Okay, put the light on, show you how it is done once, so everyone will see, people who may not know. But just put the lights on, please. This is called alternate breathing. First of all, the fingers, though we got 5 fingers, we don't use all the fingers to close the nostrils. Certain fingers, the energy emanating from this, especially this finger, is very polluted. We won't use for black magic or worldly purpose. So you can never use this finger for the japa or meditation or anything. And the other finger, so for closing the right nostril, we use the right thumb, for left nostril, left. Even that very important, because the wrong finger, wrong touching, that will bring a negative vibration in the body. So this is the way you inhale to the left, then retain, closing both the nostrils, then exhale to the right. Then inhale, then again retain, again exhale for 1 round. But there's a proportion there, 1:4:2. Inhale 1 second, you retain 4 seconds, exhale 2 seconds. Inhale 1 second, again retain 4 seconds, 1 round. But naturally, we start the proportion beginner for 4:16:8. Inhale 4 seconds, retain 16:8. And then ultimately we reach a state, both the highest 8:32:16 or even 16:64:32. A long years of practice you can do that. If by that you are regularly morning and evening, you have balanced the brain through the breathing. That's called Anuloma Viloma. Okay, now continue.
This time of breathing exercise,
Put the lights off, please.
as Swamiji now explained, has also the phase of retention of breathing called kumbhaka. And there are various kumbhakas in pranayama.
Okay, don't do more retention, okay? Translate it, if you can. If you don't know how to translate, you ask me, I'll tell you.
And these retentions are associated according to recommendations of Hatha yogic texts and gurus by locks, by bandhas. There are 3 locks, Jalandhara bandha.
Yes, this is called, put the light on, show you what Jalandhara bandha means. Put the light on. This is called putting the chin and blocking. That shuts off many energies to the lungs, to the heart, and the various nerves are completely controlled by that. But also, in order to perform Jalandhara completely at the chin lock, which very seldom many teachers do not understand that. That is, the tongue is lifted up and sucked inside. Then only the lock will be perfect. And then Mula is putting the sphincter muscles of the anus upward, just like when you want to go to urinate and you don't have place to go because you are driving at 160 miles an hour and you don't know, you hold, that's what bandha, Mula bandha means, if you don't understand what the simple way I explain that, you know. So after this two bandha, energy pattern which goes from brain's block to respiratory center and to respiratory muscles, your diaphragm, intercostal muscle will block to Jalandhara bandha and chin lock, and then Mula bandha, which goes to sexual and sensual organs that are lower in it, where constantly these two centers, sexual centers and sensual centers are activated, that are lower. And that also by whatever you block, that's called bandha, just view. And another is called Udyana bandha. That's sufficient to understand. But what bandhas mean? Okay, continue now. Now you understand bandhas means don't be frightened, but this is the meaning blocking the energy by physical method and concentration to mind.
By the physiological considerations, one can come to the conclusion that these locks have very profound influence upon the organism, because the internal pressure in the intrathoracal cavity and in the abdominal cavity rises many times, and this in turn influences the venous return to the right heart, and by this the whole cardiovascular and respiratory systems, and by this also the brain itself. Another is Jalandhara bandha, that means the chin lock, because it presses upon the very important veins and arteries which are going to and from the brain, and the receptor zones which are in the uvular cavity, which are known as pressure receptors, baroreceptors, and chemical receptor, chemoreceptors, which in turn can induce very profound changes in EEG activity, in brain electrical activity, and in consciousness. For example, Bell found in 15 that stimulation of this reflex causes the cat to sleep in several seconds. And so now we intuitively feel that great changes are induced by these locks, but now scientifically, how are the physiological effects of locks of bandhas during this particular exercise, alternate breathing or anuloma viloma? So again,
the alternate anuloma is not done. Beginners we do without bandhas, without locks. Advanced students we same proportion. Say suppose we are in here 1, 2, inhale 1, 1, 2, 3. Then 8, 16, 30 seconds we have to hold. I better apply both the bandhas lock. That 60 seconds we exhale. The bandhas are released during the inhalation exercise. When retention and bandhas are applied. Both Mula bandha, the anal sphincter muscles, which will block the energy goes outward, called apana, we call it some other time or more explanation, but this is called Mula bandha. So advanced student practice with bandhas, beginners practice without bandhas. We don't give bandhas beginners because it's not good for, because they have a proper purification that brings many altered state of consciousness. Even the mind can be disturbed improperly given to beginners. So that's one of the cautions we are giving. I know I explain what bandhas, how it's applied during the anuloma pranayama.
And this exercise was performed twice in 26 subjects. Each subject came twice, as I said, because once we was practicing anuloma viloma for 25 minutes with applying of these locks, bandhas, and the other times without applying of bandhas, so that there was a possibility to compare the same exercises, one with bandhas, on the same subject, to see the difference that causes this exercise. Before this exercise, the resting period was taken, the resting record was taken, and afterwards again a resting record was taken. And blood pressure was measured continuously by
in particular part, you can measure continuous blood pressure. That's very, again, another unique measures we have. You continue to monitor the blood pressure.
Yes, this is very special and very fascinating system that's working in this Omida blood pressure monitor, which was first built by Docent Peñas in Brno in Czechoslovakia, and this was then transferred to this Omida company. And
which company is that?
This is American one.
American.
But they built it in Netherlands, and then this was some neighboring company. I don't know what they fixed, how they get it to the USA. So this was recorded by.
And also blood pressure can be monitored by fingertips. That electrodes coming from that, the blood pressure is monitored by the by putting that electrode here with a special cap on that thing. Very sensitive equipment and that can, but continuous blood pressure monitor. They again the computer will just record everything, so we can even analyze the situation afterwards also.
Again, heart rate was recorded together with blood pressure and EEG by the same technique, by that polygraph, and the EEG spectral power in delta, theta, alpha, and beta bands were taken again in 2 or 3 second epochs, and these values then entered to the statistical analysis. So may I have the first slide? Actually, the last one, Kavadi. Yes, thank you. This slide should tell us something about the influence. Okay. Please know that we have 3 different colors of bars here: yellow, violet, and blue one, which are in such a triplet for various variables. That means beta activity, alpha, theta, delta from EEG, systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, and heart rate. And the bars represent the counts of people, of subjects of this 26, who had greater, lower, or equal, greater, lower, or equal mean value during control condition and during anuloma viloma, during exercise. So I will tell you just the meaning of this picture. During anuloma viloma, during exercise, the systolic blood pressure,
So translate inner and
alternate breathing, the systolic blood pressure increased significantly. The diastolic blood pressure increased as well, and the heart rate was also increased in most of the subjects. So these changes point to a very profound vasopressoric and cardioacceleratory. That means vasopressoric means causing increase in blood pressure due to increase of the peripheral resistance, and cardioacceleratory means that the heart rate increases, in other words. Yes. So this, in other words, there's a very profound activating effect upon the
So the heart rate went down or went up?
Heart rate increased very much.
How much from normal state?
So I don't know, from this picture one cannot obtain the mean values exactly. They are in table which I have in the lab. And what I wanted to, okay. It seems that the exercise caused increase of delta waves in EEG, but there were no changes in beta, alpha, and theta band.
That means they have, that's why it's normal.
Delta is increased.
Alpha?
Alpha, beta, and theta did not change very much, but delta was increased during alternate breathing.
That means delta is 1 to 3 cycles.
Yes.
And that increase, but generally you get that only during sleep state, is it not?
Yes, that's a question that we also asked why. And
Because generally delta 1 to 3 cycle is coming during sleep state, but you get that experience while in the waking state. That's also another you can't explain. That you know tell about that, very important.
Yes. So our opinion is that this finding should be rechecked because, as I said, this machine does not have control of the artifacts, and we are suspect of the artifactual origin of these changes because there are, as I said, great changes during Anuloma Viloma. In fact, we see similar things during Surya Vedana. Let us see the next slide. This slide shows how are the effects of prolonged exercise. So they were taken record at the first 5 minutes of the exercise of the alternate breathing, at the last 5 minutes from the 25 period. And again, the mean values were compared, and it was studied in how many persons the change is significant, in which is not significant, and in which is decreased. And it shows that the most changes were again found in the cardiovascular signals. That means there was increase of blood pressure toward the end of the exercise and increase of heart rate, while diastolic blood pressure did not change. And the EEG bands are, so the authors recommend interpretation in the sense that it was increased, but it's difficult to interpret just from this one slide. So please, may I have the next slide? This slide shows, this is the most important slide of this part of lecture because it shows or gives the answer how is the effect of bandhas, of locks during this exercise. And it shows up that the most changes were found during in diastolic blood pressure and heart rate, in sense of increasing of diastolic blood pressure and heart rate by application of locks or bandhas. There was no differences, or the same number of persons increased and decreased the systolic blood pressure. So diastolic blood pressure and heart rate differentiate between Anuloma Viloma associated with locks and Anuloma Viloma which is without locks. The changes in EEG are depicted on the left side of the panel, and they are pointing to increase of beta activity and theta. This is compared during bandhas. During alternate breathing.
First you talk normal and then like the bandhas. That way we can compare.
So this was lower beta and theta activity in situation of alternate breathing without bandhas, and increase by application of bandhas. So let us summarize these three pictures. It seems that most profound changes are found in the cardiovascular data. The alternate breathing increases systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, and heart rate significantly, and that the prolongation of this exercise increases systolic blood pressure, but not diastolic and heart rate. And application of bandhas further additionally increases diastolic blood pressure and heart rate, but not systolic blood pressure. May I have the next slide? So the EEG, we consider the findings of EEG as a preliminary at this stage because we have to repeat them by this new technology of brain imaging.
But now we got new EEG. Thanks.
So this slide shows this is a snap from the computer monitor, and it shows the subsequent values on each heartbeat, beat-to-beat values of systolic blood pressure, the upper line, of diastolic blood pressure, the lower line, and heart rate recorded during anuloma-viloma, during alternate breathing. And as we see, the blood pressure from beat to beat is not steady, it varies. And there is a law, there are several rhythms which are contained in the signals, and they are known some 110 years when Meyer and Ewald Hering and other people, Traube, have found these waves, and according to these people, they are known as Traube-Hering or Meyer waves, etc. But it's not necessary, or it's not important how it will name. Most important is that they modulate the brain, that they modulate the whole organism. In fact, that they keep the integrative role over the body. So it's important to study these rhythmical components, since they give us information whether the stability of the cardiovascular system was maintained during exercise or not. However, it's difficult to draw information from the signals just by eye. Every signal will be different, and we had to grasp the most important information from this. We normally do it by time series analysis, by spectral analysis. Please, the next slide. These are power spectral densities computed from the above signals. Here is from systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, and heart rate. The power spectrum density has on this horizontal axis frequency, which is below 1 Hz, because these are very slow changes compared to EEG. And on the vertical axis, there's a power, that means variance, which is found on the given frequency. That means this picture shows you which rhythm is found within the given series and how much of this rhythm is there. We normally compute this power spectra by means of autoregressive models and supplying by robust statistics, robust estimation of the spectra, since the signals are frequently showing non-stationarities. So what we see here, that mostly there is a low frequency component, low frequencies are here, which correspond to the anuloma-viloma cycle itself, to the cycle of one round, inspiration, retention, and expiration. This makes a great change in the cardiovascular signals, and it's seen as a low frequency peak in the power spectral densities. But we also see that there is a different peak, which is found around the frequency of 0.1 or 0.15, and this refers to spontaneous blood pressure rhythm, spontaneous blood pressure waves. And this is the rhythm that I was mentioning, that is fused regulatory control over the cardiovascular systems when the respiratory pattern changes profoundly. Changes profoundly means, for example, very much increased respiratory rate, like Kapalabhati. It's other.
Kapalabhati is the fast pumping of the diaphragmatic breathing, for diaphragmatic breathing. Just if you understand, just show you once more. Please put the light on how the fast. Swami, come here. Just demonstrate Kapalabhati. Fast. Where I want to come up. Take the shot out. Back, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, inhale. Okay, that's not Kapalabhati. Bhakti is more complicated. Okay, thank you.
As we saw, the respiratory pattern is completely changed from the spontaneous, but the physiological processes, they are adjusted to certain rhythmicity because of spontaneous breathing. So the spontaneous rhythms are to maintain the integrity of the organism when the respiratory pattern is very far from their normal being, from the normal rhythm. Now, let us summarize. However, this is just one signal, one anuloma, one alternate breathing from 600 records. So let us summarize all the data. Please, the next slide. In this picture are the peak frequencies. That means significant peaks. Their frequencies were marked and taken from all data from control situation of spontaneous breathing. And these are for systolic blood pressure. These are yellow, and violet are from diastolic blood pressure, and blue are for heart rate. And we see that certain distinct bands are appearing, as we said already, and it is a very low frequency peak, which comprise approximately 30 to 40 seconds period, then more frequent peaks of around fast frequencies which are around 10 second and 5 second period. And so please keep this picture in mind for a few seconds. Please, the next slide. And this is a situation of alternate breathing. You see that it's completely changed. Also, this was verified statistically by Komogoro test for comparison of empirical distributions. It was really different. And the main difference was in appearing of this low frequency peak corresponding to the alternate breathing cycle itself, which is long. But which is important, that there are still the very important cardiovascular frequencies appearing on 10-second period and 5-second period. That is, the normal regulatory mechanisms are still working during anuloma viloma. This is the next slide. And we made a comparison of these distributions for alternate breathing with locks and without locks. There was no difference. There was no difference between these two situations. And may I have the next slide? This is a snap from computer monitor showing the systolic beat-to-beat systolic values, systolic blood pressure values. And we constructed such a Radus program that enabled finding of these minimal points. The program marked this point, this minima, and from this point he took 40 beats and it averaged. The program averaged these so-called evoked cardiovascular responses for systolic, diastolic, and heart rate. The reason for this is following. The rhythmical variability in the signals gives you some information about the short-term regulation of the cardiovascular systems, but these so-called evoked responses gives you direct access to some certain reflexes which are triggered, for example, by inspiration, and which are very well documented in respiratory and cardiovascular physiology. So by making of this, we can now judge how the very primitive cardiorespiratory reflexes on cardiovascular respiratory reflexes have changed by anuloma or alternate breathing with bandha and without bandha. Please, the next slide. Here is an example of the evoked responses averaged over the one period. Here is for systolic blood pressure, for diastolic blood pressure, and heart rate. They show an increase of the blood pressure in several cycles, and when the retention was a little bit longer, again appearing oscillations like here and here. And the heart rate response was faster, as we see. This is because of sharing of vagal, of fast transmitting system of autonomic regulation of the heart. These responses were again averaged over the trials of alternate breathing with bandhas and without blocks, without bandhas. And they were compared by discriminant analysis. I don't have now the group differences, but I can tell you from by heart that the main differences were found in these regions, in third and fourth beat. And the differences were these: there was increase of systolic blood pressure in the third beat and fourth beat, and heart rate in the third and fourth beat by application of locks, compared to Anuloma Viloma without locks. These points that already the short-term regulation of the heart rate and blood pressure was changed by application of the locks, of the bandhas. So I would like to summarize what we saw in this experiment. Anuloma Viloma, alternate breathing.
You want that?
Yes, no
Okay.
more slides. Thank you much. Affects profoundly the cardiovascular system. It increases blood pressure, systolic and diastolic blood pressure, and heart rate, probably due to great sympathetic vasoconstrictor activity, and probably also by reduction of parasympathetic activity. And it influenced the EEG in a quite difficult, interpretable manner. We will wait until the data from brain imaging will be at disposal.
So far, did you find any change? So far, what you did?
There were certain changes in sense of increase of delta activity, which would be interesting if it would be true, but it should be checked by some other method which has access or some control over the artifacts. And this had not. But it's still enough because this is very informative experiment in the sense that one of the most early recommended pranayamas or breathing exercising for beginners has very profound effect upon the body. It stimulates the whole cardiovascular systems. Also, one warning should be added because we saw that diastolic blood pressure is increased, and when the locks are applied, still additional increase of diastolic blood pressure is observed. The hypertensive subjects should avoid this exercise because their main trouble is increase of diastolic blood pressure, and it could be also dangerous for them to apply bandhas without supervision or without any.
Again, you can see how much yogi did thousands of years ago, not to give beginners the bandha.
Yes, that's important. Just to build first the organism, and after this applied also the bandhas, which has profound influence upon diastolic blood pressure and heart rate. So, and the new data probably will be gathered now by brain imager, showing that not only cardiovascular system but also brain is influenced, which we believe it is, and not only by bandhas but also by alternate closing and opening of the nostrils, which we will talk about tomorrow because now it's a longer time.
I just only 1 minute explain about what did you see about the changes in the brain activities right in the alternate breathing.
Yes.
But tomorrow you can explain it, but just give it.
So we found that the only band that differentiates the situation of left and right nostril breathing is theta band, and that the connection between the nostril and the hemisphere is ipsilateral, not contralateral. That means breathing through left nostril increases power in theta band in all electrodes which are left hemisphere, and breathing through right in electrodes which are right hemisphere. But so this is one finding, and it's interesting because it relies upon neurophysiological studies of stimulation of bulbus olfactorius, which has direct connections to the old brain, archicortex, and it seems plausible, but we still wait because we now will have data with the brain imager. And so far we made 4 experiments. Last one was spoiled, so we have 3 good experiments, but we will have some 30.
more good. I mean, advanced students are coming, advanced teachers and good.
Yes.
They got a full subject of it.
There are reports showing contralateral relation between nostril and brain, but we should admit also that these studies only made 2 channels, post-centrally placed electrodes, not very carefully checked, and only integrative, so-called integrative power of EEG was taken, so we cannot tell which really happened.
Yes. 48 channels.
Yes, it's
So we can get a
possible. That is possible. So probably in the next time.
Now, any questions? Audience. Scientists first start. First question for scientists.
You had mentioned with respect to the first experiment, spheres going through the body, that the pre-baseline respiration rate was 20 to 28 breaths per minute. That's really quite high.
Well, it's not so high. We commonly see normal students, undergraduate students, that some of them can have frequency up to 30. They can be in women, which frequently find in women, for example, that they have up to 25 breaths per minute. It's higher, but it's not uncommon in a situation when you are awaiting cavalry and when you are still conscious, when you are not, how to say it, in a trance or during some very intense meditation or relaxation. I don't think that it's somehow, the heart rate was 70, so it's quite, I don't think that there was some very great change in the subject in the previous line. But maybe I'm wrong.
Just for my information, when you say the word artifact, what does that mean in the context? You say it could be due to an artifact. What does that mean?
Can you please come to the lab tomorrow? I will show you plenty of artifacts.
That means simple. That means what's not grounded. Suppose reading something, I open and some change will take place. I close something will change place. But moon change. So it's called artifact. So, but the new computer can detect these things and eliminate the artifact. I mean, it's not grounded for two particular activity like that. When they are doing it. That's the artifact in the subject, in the computer and in the
If I may add to this, artifacts are of 2 or 3 main sources. One are slow changes due to eye movements, which are frequently occurred during in the frontal leads of EEG. The others are from also slow movement, slow changes due to slight head shaking, like this. Mainly when people are in the cross-legged posture, then frequently they can have this.
That's why we never allow the person meditate, should not move. Even the chanting time, generally, we are not allowed to move the body. But Swami Sivananda during the chanting time, then, but we are. You want to, don't do that, okay? And some people just one. Now we say that now is prevent the artifact. Maybe I don't know what other reason we can find that from.
And there are artifacts from on high frequencies on beta range up to 30, 40. Particularly, we don't interpret activity around 40 per second because they are so mixed with muscles. And by these exercises also we have problems with this artifact because, for example, just apply lock under a bandha, you immediately have tension here developed on these temporal regions, and you get nice pictures.
How can they eliminate now this artifact?
We just are watching on the raw data and editing. This is wrong, this is correct, this is wrong, this is correct. Just by this. This cannot be handled. Sometimes it helps when we come to the person and make a gentle massage over those parts, and then the tension relieves a little bit. Or when we make this like this for relieving of eye tensions. But certain will already know from the resting record that this experiment will be lost.
But you compare the resting record with the normal with particular.
Yes.
And then the computer can eliminate this.
We do it by, so the only control is the experimenter itself. There are some artifact channels, so-called artifact channels, but we cannot rely on machine in this sense because it can do its own thing. Yes, please.
Go over what you said about the connection between the nostrils and the hemispheres of the brain. What I understood was that in your study you found it to the right nostril affect the right hemisphere,
Yes.
but in previous studies the opposite.
Yes, this was because the previous study, as we know them, they are mainly from group of Shahanov Kauza, Burns, Deborah Burns and colleagues. They made this. They made two experiments. In one, they took record of the spontaneous airflow through left and right nostril, and they showed which is greater, left or right. And they found that when the right nostril was great, the airflow through right was greater, then on the opposite hemisphere, the integral of the EEG power was greater. So, like this. And when the left hemisphere, so the greater activity was here. But they only took two leads, one left and the other on the other side, central parietal, or parietal occipital, I don't remember exactly. And the most awkward is the integral EEG activity because you don't know what really changed, alpha, theta, beta, or whatever. So there was just several subjects, very few subjects, and not only my impression was not very persuasive from these papers, so we had to recheck it again. And I don't think that this is exclusive information. That means the finding of ipsilateral relation is not possible to complement to the other mechanism. Maybe, for example, the theta band changes the nostril ipsilaterally, but for example, beta contralaterally or alpha, I don't know. So maybe both are acting, but in the different bands. It's possible. And what I would like to support our findings of these ipsilateral relations. So, for example, now with the brain imager in Prague, we made an experiment with pumping of the air to the right nostril or left nostril under hypnosis to eliminate the sensations, subjective sensations which are really got by pumping. And again, it was found on this map that by left nose pumping, the left.
How do you use pumping?
1 per second.
What type of method, mechanical method you use?
Mechanically.
But not with the yoga.
So far, no. Dr. Novak could make experiments. This is very important. This is very important, and Dr. Novak, when he comes, he could start on this. It's very good.
So what that will be a simultaneous at that time?
Just for some days.
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe we call. Did you call Srinivasana, the director, taking this, putting longer? Srinivasana, were you? Pardon? Pardon? You better why didn't you do so far? You do back time. And one more question. Did you check up in the resting period, let's see, for example, everyone please close your right nostril. Now, close the left nostril. Now, which of my nostrils is more open?
Yes, we checked it.
We checked in normal state.
Yes.
With activities in the opposite direction or this?
Yes, this could only be compared if we could continually do the measurements, for example, for 3 hours, and every 5 minutes the subject would test it. But we now have better instrument than the subjective judgment.
How do you test the nostril?
Now it is on 2 principles. Maybe Michael could explain.
You can, if you can speak in second, you transfer.
Would you like to explain the mechanism of the
nostril
measurement of the nostril dominance?
Thank you. I'm very sorry because my English is
so you
basic.
You can speak in
Yes.
So the principle is based upon elimination of energy in warmed Wolfram wire.
So there's a special bias.
Wolfram, from Wolfram, 4 microns.
This principle is used in air tunnels for measurement in airflow.
Of airflow for aircraft.
Yes, it's to measurement local speed airflow.
They are using this principle for measuring of local changes in the wind and in the small pressure, not only velocity and temperature. Those two principles are involved.
How do you get in the lab? How do you do the lab?
So we have such a mask placed. No, this was built by him, by his hand. Jak se to dělá, jak to vypadá tam? And it's from such a laminate, I don't know if I'm correct in English, laminate.
Plastic mask with two holes. And this hose is connected to probes with high hot wolfram lines.
Okay, tomorrow you get can be.
Yes, I can show it.
We will bring it to check on it.
Okay, thank you. Don't stress with the journey. Stress with it. What must you create? Any other questions? Every 2 to 2.5 hours, the nostril changes. This is due to check up this one. That's what my question I did.
Yes, we have some record. Tomorrow I'll bring some record.
Okay, thank you. Tomorrow you come. Okay. Yes.
Have you done relatively long-term, like 8 or 9 hour recordings of the respiration and loaded a 90 or 100-minute cycle?
It awaits so far not. We would like to also during sleep to have these reports, because there are reports showing that REM sleep is connected with right nostril opening or dominance.
Is it REM?
So it can be also interesting, this connection. That's interesting. Very
Put
much.
Mahadeva to sleep in the lab and then morning. So the Mahadeva will sleep. We are going to sleep and then you will morning 8 hours, 9 hours.
That's part of the basic rest activity cycle, which is evident throughout the 24-hour day, especially during sleep.
Yes, you are correct. There are people, just these two authors identified. However, I don't think it's now really time to identify the nasal cycle, the changes of the nasal dominance with the basic resting activity cycle. Probably, I have not seen just one paper showing just this. Yes, the periods are very similar. Probably it's true, but I have not seen any, for example, measuring of temperature, of other activities, blood pressure, respiration, etc., showing this nice 90 minutes modulation and nasal cycle changes. I haven't seen it, but there are changes. There are papers showing, for example, that plasma catecholamines in the left and right hand changes in the 90-minute period and correlated with nasal cycle. Probably yes, it's very, very probable that they are the same rhythms, but so far I haven't found no one article or paper showing yes. It's
And one for your future reference and for all the doctors and so forth. Long time ago, I had an opportunity to experiment with this. According to our theory, yogi theory, if nostril did not change, there's some deep inner maladies going on, some pathological condition taking place. So it must change. That's our theory. So by watching, we can find out. Suppose right now, only one person of some serious psychological problem, or whatever it is. But anyhow, that's a long story.
But I never had an opportunity to, at that time the EEG and all these machines did not have it. I was in Spain about several years ago. At that time, none of these experiences ever done anybody. A student came, Swami, I got problem. My right side is always hot and my left side is cold. And I went to every doctor and the doctor couldn't find what's wrong. And she went several doctors and she always hot on one side but not other side. And I checked, just watch, tell me which nostril you are breathing after. Just a guess, because maybe I want to see whether she's breathing one nostril all the time. Then, just like normal person, one nostril is actually blocked, half blocked as you are also having. But I was not sure that she's having this all the time, this problem. So, I don't have much time. So, do one thing, I give a piece of cotton, please block the nostril which you are not able to breathe properly. So, one nostril I block, which generally, one other, just my right nostril is partially blocked. So, I cross the left nostril I block, the nostril which is functioning, and then in another 2 hours you just kind of call me back, because though I want to see what reaction is going on. This is what a blind test I did. Usually she has got a problem. After 2 hours she called me, Swami, my temperature is normal on both sides. This actually happened. This a blind test just came from nowhere, thinking our old theory. Maybe there's some pathological condition. She may be using only one nostril all the time. So many other, but this is just sufficient for you, just you. Maybe if there is some pathological condition, you can find out by if the person only using one nostril all the time. You know, this may be for future investigation. I'm giving this information. So many other things also. I had one of the psychic phenomena which I mentioned. The girl, oh, I had problems, unbelievable. You cannot. I did that test because I am forced to make her to breathe one nostril to other so that their pain will disappear. And it's wrong subject. Anyhow, I did try with one patient, one of my students, with psychic phenomena, and she used to breathe only to one nostril, and then came that hard labor, and then her pain will go out. So many pathological mental conditions created by the nostril breathing, by we can find out that this is a new science, ever investigated. This science called Swara Yoga. Science of Swara Yoga means science of breath. Another subject that I want to talk to you more about, so you can investigate that. Let's just be sufficient to give you some glimpse of some other ancient yogic practices. Now we are first time investigating with scientists. Thank you very much. And we will conclude today, and tomorrow we will continue. Yes. And why we should not be to right nostril, left nostril. Even early morning, you must find out which nostril is functioning. You can only eat Swara Yoga. I'm just giving a glimpse of what Swara Yoga means. You know how to yoga. Swara Yoga is unknown science. Very few people know about Swara Yoga. Swara means science of breath. Just like sun and moon rise and fall take place in the atmosphere. Sun rises and the moon goes down, and moon rises, sun goes down. So sun and moon also in its body take place for Swara Yoga. Rise on the right nostril, sun, and then the left nostril goes down, left breath. And then rise on the left nostril, the right nostril goes up for Swara Yoga. Simple to understand. So rise and fall of the energy in the body. Sun energy active, then moon energy is active. And that's that. Some yogis do practice very well, but it's very complicated and very cautious thing. Because you don't attend to anything else afterwards. If you really practice for yoga, they don't there all the time, 24 hours a day, so they can practice. So if you are right nostril, the sun is supposed to be very hot, the right nostril breathing. So you should do things which are very cool activities. And the moon is cool, the left nostril. So you must do activity which is hot. So eating, now which nostril you must use it? They say, okay, eating is a warm condition. So you eat when the left nostril is active. And then meditate when the both nostrils are functions almost same. And do activities. You are going to take this. I'm just giving. It's not exactly, but it's sufficient to give an idea. Suppose you are going to get a job. You check up the nostril. whether you are going to get a job or not. If the one nostril is, the cool nostril is blocked and the active nostril, you may not get it. So you check up your nostril and wait. Or you can change this nostril, also this also doctor and you can change by using yoga danda, that is the ancient art. You can see Lord Shiva has together a staff, a curved staff, and some yogis do have it still. And they press that to change the nostril breathing. It's just like acupressure. They put the pressure, or by changing the side. If you slide on the right side, then nostril you can change it by changing the side by which side you are going to sleep. All this are just so good, so you can investigate. Okay. Anyhow, so they use the change of the nostril by using yoga danda. They put the pressure on certain side and they change the nostrils. And then certain good actions you perform. Don't do charity at certain time when the nostril is bad, because the charity may that particular action, though it's good action, will just bounce on back to you. So many things are, that's too complicated for me to explain. But you got a science waiting for studying for thousands of years. And you talk immediately to the director, just keep him for another few months with the two doctors coming from Sekosana together. I think they can do a much better job than one brain, you see. And then Shankarnara, he's supposed to keep, I want to keep for a long time, but his wife is calling and his cat is, what, I can't help him much, but he's got problems, he has to go away. Anyhow, with the two doctors and one engineer, he's also no engineer at that when he comes, right? But what about Pune, he will be able to stay longer? Same thing, same problem. He has to go. PhD, then you can wait more, you can study and because really you get a good mark, okay? And then find out which nostril is functioning, okay? Before you go to, yeah.
He's working on his PhD on a completely different subject, which is here for the yoga. His subject is working PhD is on neural computers.
Neural computer subject? That's marvelous. So so many doctors are coming out nowadays. Okay, now let us just balance our boost brain. Okay, now you know what Sarya Yoga is. Inhale, bring all the lights down. Just for 5 minutes.